All right, I know what you're thinking. Here we go. We have another guru telling us how to study for the MCAT. You guys, I'm teaching you in this video what's worked for me. This last week, I added 6 points to my MCAT CARS score. And this video is no fluff. I'm just going to get right into it and tell you what's worked for me. I'm not a perfect score MCAT, but I'm sharing my journey along the way. And, in 4 tests of full exam CARS, I've increased 6 points. I'm just going to share the secrets with you guys. I'm going to share the sauce. Not holding back, not pulling any punches. So here's the test history. You can see test 1 was March 17th. Today's March 27th. Your boy's birthday's in 2 days. Let's go. You can see I went from a 66%, which is like a 123, to a 129, 130 is 87%. So I'm going to show you exactly what I did to increase by 6 points, essentially over 4 tests. First things first is I want to show you this passage is a good example. I just remember this one very well. Essentially, you can see my highlights are very little. And that's because in the first 2 passages, I was, you can see I have more highlights. This next passage as well, I have a little bit more highlights. And then it's funny because as the passages go on, I have less and less. And that was a reflection of actually me just moving quicker through the material. And so one of the biggest tips that I realized, here's tip number 1. Don't over highlight. It actually slows you down because you're reading along and then you're like, oh, this is important. And then you highlight it. And then it's like, for some reason, it does something to how you internalize that information. It's almost like you're letting your brain say, hey, we could forget this now. We don't have to continue to remember this. We've highlighted it. We're good. So I think over highlighting is just really a big problem. And there's a lot of literature out there to suggest that highlighting isn't even actively involved for learning. So it's just a low leverage thing to do to highlight. Just it's not worth it. Highlight something that's valuable, okay, occasionally, but other than that, I don't over highlighting. Big problem. Okay, so the first things first, right? I think I showed you. Okay, this is my first test here. We could see I was highlighting much more. So this is the first exam I took. Look at all these highlights. So we're not doing that anymore. Second thing is this. This is really the biggest thing. On test 4 here, it's really when it clicked with me, the fact that you need to slow down on these passages, and it's counterintuitive because in these first couple of passages, I was taking so much time to read these. I think I took like 16 or 17 minutes on this one passage for the first passage. And in spite of that, I finished this test with 7 minutes remaining. So I actually had leftover time in spite of spending like 17 minutes on this first passage. So how did I do that? I recovered so much time because on passage 3 and 3 through 9, I essentially made a split-second decision, okay, I'm going to change my style. And this is what it was. I paid so much attention to this first paragraph of every passage. And what I would do is, in the very first paragraph, I wouldn't skip to the end. Usually that's like some advice that I used to follow, and I think that works well, actually. But for the most part, in the first paragraph, I would read it so carefully that I would create a mental mind map of exactly what I anticipate this passage to be about, but just most importantly, what's the framework that they give me? And let me make a mental mind map of that from this first paragraph. That's what I did with these last, passages, 3 through 9. And when I did that, it took a little bit longer to kind of get through that first paragraph. But because I had this schema, this framework in my head, I could fly through the rest of the paragraphs and be like, oh yeah, this is fluff, or this applies to my mind map, or this doesn't. And by the way, for those of you who are interested in what is it that I'm visualizing when I'm talking about, you're thinking of a mind map of the passage. This is what I mean. And I have my camera here. You see this? I'm essentially, I have a main idea from the passage, from the paragraph, first paragraph, right? Because that first paragraph gives you the main idea for the passage, essentially. It should. And so you have that idea, and usually in every passage, there's always going to be, external stakeholders that they bring in, the author brings in. Okay, this person has this opinion, this person has that opinion, and that's what I labeled critic one and critic two. And so what's the relationship? Okay, so the main idea is this, and critic one thinks this, and critic two thinks that. That's a 3 to 4 main ideas in a mind map that you make from the first paragraph. That's what I took the time to do in my head. And it saved me so much time when it came to just flying through the rest of the passage. And then most importantly, answering the questions. Now, I say flying through the rest of the passage. What you don't want to do is take too much time. Too little time, actually internalizing everything else. So I make that mental framework for paragraph one, but I'm adjusting it. I'm reading. I'm saying, how does this fit in? Does this change that model? And that helped me so much. And what I will tell you is this. I've seen some advice out there. And once again, I'm not a guru. I'm at a humble, 129 on a practice exam. I think that's quite good. But, I'm not a perfect scorer. That's my goal. It is. That'd be great. But I'm not that. I'm not that yet. I'm not there yet. So everything I'm sharing is what's worked for me now. Okay, so up until this point, this is what's worked for me. And other people, they've said that, I've seen, gurus and tutors, popular piece of advice is to actually come up with one sentence after every paragraph that encapsulates the whole idea for the entirety of the passage. So with every new paragraph, they say, okay, does that change your one sentence overview? And I think that having a mental mind map is just so much better because you're not going to get relationships depicted in one sentence. You're not going to get anything visualized. You're not going to remember that sentence, that's the biggest tip that I could share is mind mapping in your head. And you could practice. I'm a big mind mapper in general when it comes to learning science or anything like that. So I'm very, it's intuitive for me to just imagine it. But you might just have to start just a little doodle, 3-4 main ideas. It doesn't take long to just doodle that out, a little relationship. The arrow goes here, arrow goes there. Okay. And then you have that and you can reference that. Now, okay, you have your mind map. You took 4, 5, 6 minutes to go through the passage. These questions, you should fly through them. I mean, if you have that deep understanding, what you do is now you say, okay, what's the question? How does this fit the framework of the mind map? And you're testing every option against that mind map, that schema. Does this align? Does this align? Does this align? Because at the end of the day, the AAMC passage styles, they are heavily influenced by the main idea. And if you made that main idea mind map, you're gonna be pointing towards the right direction. And you can see here, this is super interesting. If I go back, well, how about this? I'll show you exactly. I think I remember question 29. Okay, actually, I think it was even sooner than that. Hang with me. Here it is. Okay, so question 20 was my last wrong answer, and then look what happens after question 20. It was passage 3, question 20. Boom, passage 4 hits. I didn't miss a single question. I didn't miss a single question for those last, 33 questions. So, and that goes to show you, like, when I made that split decision, like, I'm going to slow down in the passage and I'm going to mind map this, that's the effect that had. That I got all 33 questions right thereafter. So I just say that. And I recovered the time from passage 1. And I finished with 7 minutes left over on the side. So you take the mind map, that's your new rubric. That's your new um, statement of truth is what that is. And you put everything against that. You put the question against that. You put the answer choices against that. And you should be pointed in the right direction. So that's the biggest piece of advice right there. Now, some other big tips that I've, garnered, you can see here if you watch my study with me's, I have this Excel sheet, and I can share a template of this in the description of this video so you guys can do this as well. But essentially I write down like, okay, UPangea test 1, passage 1, question number. Okay, where did I go wrong? Was it a question that I didn't understand the question? What was the answer trap of how I got the answer wrong, etc. And I do this for all the wrong answers. And I say, okay, what's the reasoning that I had for picking this answer? And what's the correct reasoning? Okay, what's my strategy for next time? So I did this for the past 4 exams. And I'll just give you guys the rundown, essentially, of all of my notes. I'll give you the golden nuggets. The biggest thing in terms of patterns, key patterns that I've recognized with taking these exams of the past, 4 tests, you have to anchor yourself to, you have to remind yourself that the author, just because they say something, it doesn't mean that they mean it. So in passage 8 here, you have what's a good example when the author starts talking about 2 core principles. Oh, okay. Author starts talking about 2 core principles of modern economic doctrine, but then the author goes on right afterwards and says, such positions, though widely embraced, rest on questionable premises. So the author says this thing right here. Like, they could easily make a question on this. Like, okay, what does the author say about the 2 principles, and what does the author support, or something like that. And it's like, well, the author says this, but they don't think that they don't support this statement. They say it's questionable. So just because the passage says something, and there's better examples, but you get the gist. Just because the passage says something doesn't mean the author's owning that statement. You have to be careful and understand what is their perspective of that statement. So that's one of the big ones. Now, another one, I have my notes here, just reading them out here. Oh yeah, you want to make sure that you're not reading too fast. And I know I kind of touched on this earlier, but a lot of times, a lot of advice out there in terms of CARS is like, the biggest problem is people run out of time. Now, I was in reading comprehension classes in the 4th grade. I struggle with timing, and I've struggled with timing for CARS. And yet here I am, I'm able to finish with 7 minutes remaining after butchering the first passage. And now, we'll see in our study with me if I can continue the progress and keep up the pace. But to my experience, what's helped me the most with reading efficiency is actually not the advice of don't self-internalize the words because it'll slow you down. That's BS. Just because you can read faster doesn't mean you can internalize. So you need to, and by the way, what I'm talking about is when you're reading, you say if I'm reading this in my head, I'll say in my head the repeated rituals of investment and the unspoken promise. And they say, don't vocalize that in your head because it slows you down. But the thing is, yes, it slows you down, but I'm able to integrate that into my mind map. I'm able to deeply understand what is it that the author is saying. And I might even take time after I read that sentence to pause and reflect on it. So speed is not the name of the game when it comes to reading the passage. You know where speed comes in? Do you know how you buy back that time? It's by not having to reread the passage again because you have such a good mind map. So taking time on the passage will allow you to fly through the questions and answers. It will. And I'll just say, a big point on practicing CARS is volume negates luck. Look, if you're doing what everyone else is doing, you're doing 1 passage, 2 passages, maybe 3 passages a day for your CARS practice, you'll get the score everyone else is getting. Like, if you just do more volume, you do 9 passages, you do a full section. Like, hell, like, I might even try to do double that. I might do a 4-hour study with me. Comment below if you want to see that, of me doing 2 full CARS sections back to back, just all in one shot, 180 minutes. I could do that. I could try. I don't know. Maybe it'd be good content. My point is, volume negates luck, and the more volume and reps that you get in practice, the more likely you are to pick up on patterns. And you can pick up like, oh, these answer choices are too strong. This answer choice is a mischaracterization. You get your own feel of things. You get your own understanding of what to look for, and like you get your own understanding of like, oh yeah, I've read passages like this before, and the author's just putting in some fluff here, and you kind of, it's almost unteachable. Like, you just have to put in the work. You need volume. So, that's one of my biggest pieces of advice is don't just do 1 passage, 2, 3 passages a day. Do a whole section. It's going to help you on the rest of the MCAT. You're going to get more stamina and confidence in your reading capabilities, and that's just going to help you. So that's essentially everything. I covered the timing. I covered the most important thing, which is the mind mapping. I covered the trickery of the questions. Don't get tripped up on statements being pulled from the passage and whether they're the perspective of the author on those statements. Make sure you just double check that. And I kind of a last tidbit. And I'm not a guru, and I'm not a perfect scorer. I'm just sharing my journey, and I'm sharing what's worked with me. If this doesn't work for you, that's fine. I just thought I'd share. But what I'd say is the answer choices. The correct answer is completely correct, and the incorrect answer is going to have a part of it that's incorrect. It doesn't have to be completely incorrect, but if a part of it is incorrect, the whole thing is incorrect. So keep that in mind and pay close attention to these questions, because you could read these questions a little too quickly and get a little excited, and you might think you know what the question's asking, but you don't. And then you're like, oh, I don't know what the answer choice is. Well, did you read the question good enough to know? Because if you read the question good enough, it'll point you to the right answer. So that's essentially it, guys. Hope you have a good day, and keep up the good studying.